The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, in recent years, the word trauma has become quite popular. You hear it quite a lot, but it's also misunderstood. Well, in his book, In Trauma Proof, international expert Benjamin Perks redefines how we see childhood trauma and outlines a new path towards healing and prevention. He joins us now. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Selina.
Now, I know that you work for UNICEF and you've worked for the UN, but does this come from a personal story?
I think it comes from a combination of both my personal experience and my working life. So I came from a children's home background. I as a child, I experienced extensive trauma, neglect and abuse. And I went through life not really talking about it and being very focused on my career and thinking I was doing well, but then realized at some point in early middle age that I wasn't. So I went into a process of healing, and it was really life transformative. And then as a UNICEF guy and working for the UN, I was used to doing these huge programs to prevent things like polio or water contamination or malnutrition at large scale. And so the question I asked myself was, if I can heal from trauma, can we not create the conditions to prevent child trauma and its profound effects on people throughout their life at scale? And that was the inspiration for the book.
Yeah, great idea, because I know a lot of people become physically ill in adult life, don't they? That has all stemmed from childhood trauma.
Yeah, that's right. We now know, and this is brand new science, we now know that there is what we call a neurobiological impact in childhood if a child feels unloved or unsafe, either consistently or intermittently. If they have those experiences, they can have an impact on the neurobiological development, the emotional development, even the immune system and the cardiovascular system that can stay with them throughout life if it's not addressed.
So are you saying that that's why we have a heightened risk of things like heart disease?
Yes, I think that child trauma is one of the when they do a population level piece of research on the amount of trauma within society, the amount of trauma adults in society carry from childhood, they find that those with extensive trauma are much more likely to have worse outcomes in mental and physical health, in things like diabetes and non-communicable diseases, and a whole range of other outcomes too. And it kind of makes sense if we think about it rationally. You know, this child development is setting the foundations for the whole of life, the way that you build the foundations on a house. And if it goes wrong, and often it goes wrong for unintentional automatic reasons, intergenerational transmission of trauma. When it goes wrong at the beginning, it has consequences for life unless they're addressed.
How did you heal yourself, Ben? I mean, did you heal yourself mentally or were you ill physically as well?
Well, you know, I predominantly mentally. I was doing a lot of sport and I had a very active life. Although we do know that child trauma drives things like obesity and addiction, other health issues as well. But it primarily affected the way I managed relationships. So I found it very difficult to get too close to people and to have sustainable relationships. So I was flourishing with my career, but I was on my emotional and personal life, I was avoidant. And so at one point I was listening to somebody talk about the way that children's home backgrounds affect the way adults manage their emotional life. And I decided at that point to go into therapy, and it completely transformed my life. I spent over a year in therapy, and my world went from black and white to color. And it just really, really changed the quality of life in every single way.
And how? I'm only asking you this because I'm sort of playing devil's advocate. I know, a lot of people that will be listening that are in a similar situation, but they want to know what actually you do at therapy that can help you feel that way.
Gabor Mate, who's one of the world's leading kind of trauma experts, says that what therapy does is it makes you aware of your true self. It puts you in touch with what's really going on in your world. So when you have trauma or traumatic experiences in life, you tend to develop this rigidity, and you give yourself a life story that kind of protects you from having to confront often the pain. So with therapy, things are difficult before they get better, but they help you to truly understand what's going on in your life. And like any illness, and I work very closely with the World Health Organization and other health groups on organizations on this, like any illness, half of the recovery is really being aware of what the problem really is. So if you've got people that are struggling with relationships or maybe addiction or other issues, it's often something much deeper within themselves, which if they can talk about it, become aware of it, and process it, very important, process it, they're less likely to suffer from it, but they're also, most importantly, less likely to transmit it to their children.
Yes, of course. Yeah, then the cycle never ends, does it?
That's right. We know that trauma is predominantly intergenerationally transmitted. There's a lot of research on this now, looking at family trauma. So parents that grow up with abuse and neglect, if there isn't a conversation about how they're going to parent their own children, if they don't have a chance to think about it, they're likely to transmit it to their own children without even thinking about it. But we also see that situations like Holocaust, or Second World War, or other situations where you have collective trauma of a population, or Palestine and Israel or Ukraine, that also becomes transmitted across generations long after the war is finished. So these are all areas where we have so much brand new research that's helping us to guide policy and the way we respond to this as societies and governments and UN.
So are there some policies that the governments can put in place to lead the way?
Yeah, the most effective thing that governments can do to prevent this is to make universal access to parenting programs. So when you have a child and in the first couple of years, just to get simple home visits where or have group sessions where you have the ability to talk to a professional about parenting, about play, about development. And then these can be supported by things like apps and other types of information, just so parents have a chance to think through the way they're going to parent their own child. This is the most effective way of breaking intergenerational transmission. The second thing that's really important, and I talk about this in my book, is the importance of teachers and secondary attachments in society. So if we can make schools and preschools in particular places where children are safe and seen and soothed when they are when they have unmet needs at home, this also is very powerful in breaking the transmission of trauma. And if you listen to celebrity interviews, or Melvin Bragg, the British interviewer, said that always somebody would say, "There's this teacher made a difference in my life." So if you can make sure that no child is going through childhood without having a positive relationship with the teacher, then I think that also puts in place a good system to protect children. And then thirdly, we need to make sure that response services and other interventions are really focused on helping the child to overcome the trauma, and particularly not enter adolescence with child trauma, because that's when the risk really starts. If you have children with very severe child trauma or very severe abuse and neglect, and they enter adolescence, risk is really, really high. So if you look at prison populations, children that are trafficked or victims of radicalization and stuff like that, they are almost always coming from situations of high trauma. So it's not only helping the individual. If we can address child trauma and prevent it, we're also helping the security and the economic and social development of our society.
And what about social media, Ben? Because we've talked about trauma that can come from childhood in the home, but the day and age we live in nowadays, children are getting bullied 24/7, aren't they? Because of the internet, really.
Yeah, it's an additional risk that needs to be addressed. I mean, the most important thing with social media risk is for the children to have good relationships with their parents. So if parents are having a good attachment with their children, that's the most important protective factor, even for risks like social media. But I think we also need to regulate social media, and particularly with the onset of AI, to ensure that everything is done to prevent bullying online.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting stuff. Is this your first book, Ben? I know that it started off with a blog.
Yeah, it is. It's my first book. I've had a couple of chapters in other people's books. But yeah, and what's interesting is that literature was very much a part of my kind of childhood recovery. I had a great teacher who really got me into writing when I was a kid. So I always felt I had this debt to writing. And so writing a book was just a wonderful opportunity and experience. I hope it's the first of many.
Yes, so do I. And if it is, then do come on the show again.
Will do.
Well, we're selling your book right now on our website for our listeners. It's called Trauma Proof, Healing Attachment and the Science of Prevention. It's by Benjamin Perks, who we're speaking to now, and it is out now. Do you want to just give your blog address out, Ben?
Oh, that's a good question. If I had it to hand, I think it's just called Benjamin Perks Blogspot.
It is indeed. It is indeed. I've got it up here. Yes. Just put that in and people can find it. It's been great to chat to you. Thank you so much for being on the show, Ben.
You too. Thank you so much, Dina. Have a great day. And
You
hi to everybody
too.
there in Europe.
Bye-bye for now. Bye.
Bye.